Hey, welcome everybody. It's another video post here on BlackFIRE-RISIng. Very happy to have with me today, uh, distinguished gentlemen. Uh, the topic of this one is, ask a law enforcement officer. I'm sure you all are aware of what's been going on in the media, hard times, a lot of things pressing the community and the country from all sides. And like the theme of this channel, I think it's important to get perspectives of the everyday people, the people that are, extraordinary, ordinary, as we say. Hey, bro, man, thanks for coming on, doing the interview. Glad you decided to do that, and I really appreciate it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm retired from the Philadelphia Police Department. Um, I worked 23 years as a Philadelphia police officer and supervisor. I started my career in the U.S. Army at the age of 20. Uh, I did my active time, served as a military police officer, and served in communications. When I got out of the military, the police department was sort of an easy transition because of the rigidness and let's see, how can I put it? The daily routine and just having something that I went into the military to get, which was discipline. And that played a large part. So when I got out of the Army, the police department was a fairly easy transition. Uh, Once I got in the police department, I learned a lot of things, and I went through a lot of different things that we may or may not talk about. I did
Okay.
my 23 years in the military. I did my 23 years in the police department. And when I retired in 2004, I went over to the U.S. Marshal's office and served 8 years as Special Deputy Marshal.
Wow. Okay.
After that, uh, my wife and I moved to Delaware. I took a job here in Delaware as a court security officer. I did that for about 3 years.
Okay.
And after that, I worked 3 years as a constable here in Delaware. A constable is another word for a police officer. I was basically a campus police officer.
Okay.
And then at the age of 65, I decided to pull the plug, and I'm retired, totally retired.
After all that, man, wow, that's a really accomplished career. Yeah, when you were talking about that's sort of the word I was thinking of too, as you were describing your transition from the military. I was thinking that discipline. And I know that it's been said that just a strict code of discipline and a loyalty to duty is sort of what it takes have have what it takes to be in a career like law enforcement, man. I can only imagine some of the things you come across and see as a law enforcement officer, and sort of the nuts and bolts of society, and where the most dramatic, the most life-changing situations for yourself and for other people happen in that lane, especially a city like Philadelphia. So, and that actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask. And, what was that like? What was it like being a career law enforcement officer in a city like Philadelphia? And considering the discipline and the attitude that I'm sure you had to adopt in order to adapt on a sustained basis, on a daily basis, because a police officer is not just something you do. I mean, I think it transitions into more of who you are in a way. It's not like one of those jobs you go check in and check out at the end of the day and you leave it at office max. So I mean, how did that change you, what, as a man, as a person and a man?
Well, let me say the police department, or I'll say law enforcement, isn't for everybody. We need to be clear about that. It's not for everybody.
Right.
But, you know, I guess it goes back to the way I was raised. And, I was blessed enough to come from a two-parent household. My parents stressed education. I have 5 brothers and sisters. My parents never had to go to the police station to pick up any of us. We
Right.
all went to school, we got our education, we tried to do the right thing. And when I decided to join the police department, well, I applied and I was accepted. Being a veteran helped a lot because they had a 10-point veterans preference.
Okay.
So whatever your score was, if you were a veteran, you automatically got 10 points. And so I was in the first academy class of the 1980 list. I joined in 1981. I was the only African-American in my class.
Wow. Of what size? Class of how many?
It was a very small class. It was only about 32, 33 people.
Okay.
And most of us were veterans.
Okay.
The academy it was pretty difficult. It was like going to college because you can't enforce the laws of Pennsylvania or any other state if you don't know the laws. You can't enforce the motor vehicle code laws if you don't know what the motor vehicle code laws are.
Right.
You can't arrest someone if you don't know, what to charge them with. We have murder 1, murder 2, murder 3, voluntary manslaughter. We have, you go to school to learn all these things. So when you hit the street, you have a pretty good idea what you're doing.
Okay.
So the academy wasn't too bad. You had to study, and I studied hard, and it's pretty physical. You have to run, jump, learn how to shoot, do all those things, which I pretty much knew how to do. But when I graduated, I was sent to a section in Philadelphia called Kensington,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty rough section of town. This is 1981.
Okay.
You have to understand, I was fresh out of the academy. I'm ready to do the job. I want to help people. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to be a credit to my, to my race, to my community.
Right.
And I get to the 26th district where I was assigned. And my first supervisors, my lieutenant and my sergeant, were both white. And they looked at me, and from that instant on, they had it in for me. They
Wow.
tried their best to get me fired. And this was a shock. They were open with their racism.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. One day after roll call, this was typical. When you have roll call, they tell you what's going on in the neighborhood, what to look for, be careful, da, da, da. And they dismiss you to go in your patrol car and hit the street. Well, one day after roll call, they said, Benz, stand by. Everybody else clear out. So I'm standing at attention, and everyone else has left the room except the sergeant and the lieutenant. Sergeant walks up to me, nose to nose, walks up right into my nose and says, "You no good so-and-so, goddamn this and that, we're gonna get you out of here, and I don't know who the F you think you are, and we're gonna get you fired." And I'm standing at attention. What he wanted was for me to react and
Right.
maybe push him or hit him or something. And the lieutenant was standing behind him as his witness. So I just stood at attention, and I took it. And this was pretty much daily. So you can imagine, how I felt, considering I was the only Black officer in my class. And the other officers knew what was going on. And they just said, just Ben, just be cool, be calm, you'll be fine. Just don't worry about it. Take it easy. Just do the best you can, and you'll be okay. So I made a phone call to the Guardian Civic League, which is the Association of Black Police Officers. I didn't know what else to do. So
Right.
I called the Guardian Civic League, and thankfully, the president answered the phone, and I told him what happened. He says, "Just stand by, we're going to do our best to get you out of there." So they made a phone call, and that person made a phone call. Make a long story short, the sergeant and the lieutenant were told to leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
So The following day at roll call, everyone leave, then you stand by. I'm standing at attention. Everyone else is gone again. They said, we don't know what you did. We don't know who you called, but we're going to get you. We're going to get you fired. And we're going to get your ass out of here. Da, 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 da. So the next day I was transferred to a different part of town, thanks to the Guardian Civic League. And that's when my career really began. But for my first 6-8 months, it was hell. All the other officers had police cars. They worked with veterans. I was put on a foot beat from midnight to 8 in the worst part of town. From midnight to 8 on a foot beat in the worst part of town for 6 months.
Wow.
The sergeant would come by 2 or 3 in the morning, sign my log, and move on. And it was difficult, but I was able to overcome that. And when I was transferred out, that's when my career really began. And I was, I had good supervisors. I had good officers I was working with. And pretty soon I was training officers. So that's when my career really started.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, these individuals, these two in particular, was that the extent of their career? I mean, did they promote? Did they become, other chiefs, or what did the rest of that career look like for them? And were you ever able to sort of look over, see them, or in any way, real or imagined, just sort of reconcile, or just sort of, reconcile or get some closure to what they had tried to do to you initially?
Well, the lieutenant eventually retired. I think he's passed away. I'm not certain. The sergeant ended up committing suicide. So he had his own set of problems.
Okay.
But they were two examples of people who had no business on the police force. You can imagine what they did out on the street to other Black people. And here I am, a young Black officer, and they resented the fact that I was there.
Right.
You didn't know me at all, only my skin color.
Exactly. Okay, man, that being said, so establishing how much a career in law enforcement demands, the demands that it put on you, not just in a physical sense, okay, going out in the streets, being stressed, interpreting cues and signals, I imagine, from the public, the looks, the stares, whether or not you choose to consciously process these things or not. I imagine they're there, and just sort of the tension. Do you think that you're still that same person, I mean, at your core, that you were when you started? Because now you're retired and you've been out of that lane, quote unquote, that once demanded such a fundamental change out of you. I mean, do you feel yourself sort of slowing down in your mind and in your instincts, going back to sort of a more laid back and peaceful state, perhaps, like, or the person you were before you got into law enforcement? Do you find yourself sort of going back to being that guy, or just being someone different altogether?
Well, that's a big question. It encompasses a lot of different things, from walking a fine line between policing your own community.
Right.
I believe I did the best I could out there. I think I did. I trained other officers. I tried to treat people the way I wanted to be treated, or would have liked to be treated if I came in contact with the police. I wasn't abusive. I've been called, I had to arrest a Black guy once. And I've arrested a lot of people, but there's one particular Black guy, and I'll never forget when I arrested him, and I gave him every chance to not be arrested. Let me make that clear.
Right.
He got himself arrested. And he called me a name that I'd never heard before. He
Okay.
said, "You're nothing but a tool of the white man." And I said, huh, I've been called a lot of things, but I've never been called a tool of the white man. So it just kind of stuck with me. But he got
Uh-huh.
himself locked up. Um, you try to police, you know, you want to be as fair as possible.
Right.
You asked me, did it change me? I'm still the same person, but I have much more life experience.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Like early in my career, as a rookie officer, there are things that I saw that I knew were wrong, but I didn't say anything. I just kind of
Mhm.
let it go, just
Mhm.
trying to fit in and get along.
Right.
But as I got more time on the force and got my feet set and began to see more things and learn more things and become more assertive, there are certain things that I just didn't tolerate anymore.
Right.
And it took me 10 years to go from police officer to sergeant. When I made sergeant, those things that I saw that I tolerated as an officer or as a rookie cop, there's no way.
Right.
So that's one reason why I became a supervisor, to have more input, more say so in the day-to-day activities, you know, of the police department. Because if you don't speak up, nothing will change.
Right. Right.
Nothing will change.
Man, and that's okay. Yeah, that sort of leads into another thought, like something you said. I imagine, okay, for example, a scenario when you first began, you had a strong sense of duty moving forward. You had military discipline, which requires focus, single-mindedness. And then when you come up against sort of the obstacles and the confrontations you had with, those who outrank you in the beginning, and then even some of the things you saw in the street. So you're getting sort of from both sides, from within the institution, from outside the institution. But it's sort of the discipline, the strength of duty, the sense of duty that can keep you moving forward. Um, Not a lot of room for much sentimentality, I would imagine, or even, philosophical concerns or political concerns. You just got to be like, this is the job. This is what I have to do. I'm not going to let anything dissuade me. So, using that example, you said when that guy called you a tool of the white man and it sort of stuck with you throughout your transition and evolution on the force, but even as a man who is becoming increasingly educated, wiser, did you ever find any mindset or philosophical mindset or worldviews that started to cause you to question your mission as an individual, or cause you to feel sort of a division within yourself as being both a black man and in law enforcement, when you are like the guy accused you of being a tool? You're an employee of an institution that was historically identified as being oppressive, but yet and still you were born into a community that has been traditionally identified as being the target of that same institution. I mean, I'm just wondering, what was that like, and how did you overcome that?
Well, again, that worldview, um, the sense of morality, it all goes back to your childhood or the way you were raised. I was pretty secure in myself. When he called me a tool of the white man, you know, I kind of laughed it off, but it did
Mm-hmm.
stick with me
Mm-hmm.
because, I've helped people of all colors.
Right.
And I understand the police department. And it's still, there is some racism still in the police department. Let's not kid ourselves. But the only way you can change that is to change it from within. Um, there are a lot of African Americans that would never consider a career in law enforcement because of
Right.
those same reasons that you mentioned.
Right.
But if you want to make change, the change starts with you.
Right.
And yeah, I know who I am, and I see the conflict between the police department, the community, the Black community, defund the police. I'm aware of all that, but I know who I am, and it doesn't change me. It just makes me understand things more and work harder to maybe try to change things.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer. Um, one of my favorite books, and I've used it in other videos on this channel. The author's name is escaping me right now, but it's called The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I'm not sure if you've heard of that book. I think they did like a movie. It was a movie once. And the notion of it was you had an uprising happening in, I believe it was Chicago. And the notion was the people were uprising, which was an organic grassroots movement. And it was the tension and everything was there, but they were lacking direction. And so what wound up happening is one from among their ranks, this young brother, he actually went and took a job with I believe it was the CIA, and he wound up getting all this training, and he was became part of the institution. And then what actually wound up happening is, since he was so deep undercover, because his heart and his love for his people didn't change throughout the career while he was climbing the ranks and learning, he was faced with the duality of staying undercover or being who he was loyal to, meaning the Black America. And at the same time, since he couldn't blow his cover, he had to deal with sort of the insults that he was getting from the Black community during a revolutionary time. And I think the stage was maybe in the 70s. So it was like maybe the epitome of a Black power movement,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, he wound up being able to use a lot of what he learned um, in terms of reconciling who he was as a man and his community. And I know that's not like necessarily a mode, but I mean, philosophically, psychologically, that book was always powerful because it spoke to sometimes the duality that we face as people in the Black community when we want to excel in existing institutions. And there aren't any of them that aren't, I think, don't have sort of these racist forces in them. Because overall, when we don't own them, I think a lot of the attitudes and racist policies that plague the country, they are obviously going to plague these institutions. And it speaks to the duality of us trying to excel and be successful within these institutions while at the same time not losing who we are in this transition. Um, so just when you were talking, it just sort of made me think of that. The other thing you said, which leads into another question I wanted to bring up. Um, so the defund the police movement. So, we know the narrative. Um, there was an existing narrative that I think was not always highlighted. Some of the things you saw, like you said, once you made sergeant, you were able to make command decisions in the field and stop injustices from happening in real time. But I think what the public at large was sort of primed. The imagery is, the Rodney Kings, the George Floyds, the you name it. And so since the George Floyd, I think maybe a lot of the tension and the conceptions that the public had about the police, the morality of what they saw in in the highlights and the reels. I think something broke, and nowadays we see the defund the police movement. Now I'm gonna do a, I want to do a sort of a scenario, and I want to get your opinion on it. So, what do you say about people that say when you go back to, say, the 80s, the 90s, the police department had a certain budget, but then say it was a certain size, it was X amount of dollars. And then you had other budgets, other institutions like Head Start, early childhood development, after school programs. And some would say that once uh, sort of prison industries and everything became involved in uh, investing uh, in social spheres and in what was traditionally governmental spheres, like prisons or whatever, that they eliminated a lot of those intervention programs. And some people point to that and they see defunding as a return to those days where more money is given to early childhood, more money is given to after school programs, etc. Uh, A, what do you think about the validity of that? And then B, do you think that the public at large really understands what defunding means? Being does it mean getting rid of police? Like absolutely, or does it mean just simply reallocating a portion of the budget to return to the days of old, as it were?
Well, I'm one of the people who benefited from those programs when I was in elementary school in the late 50s and 60s. I benefited from a lot of those programs. But when you say defund the police, it it automatically becomes political.
Mm-hmm.
It's a term that causes confusion when you say defund the police. And I think certain people use it to cause division.
Right.
I don't believe in defunding the police. If you want to, allocate money or rearrange some things, then that's one thing. But when you say defund the police, people get a picture in their mind of taking money from the police, and the police need their resources.
Mm-hmm.
They need all the resources they can get. Uh, they need a lot more training. I think the hiring process needs to be looked at because they have a lot of officers who shouldn't be anywhere near a gun or on the police force.
Right.
So I don't like that term, defund the police. Um, there's a lot of different places that you can move things around or allocate money for this or that. Um, I think the money that goes to the police department should be looked at more closely and someone overseeing that it goes where it should go. But you have to understand, I mean, the police unions, they're very powerful. And when you try to change things in the police department, it can be very, very difficult.
Right.
And I can tell you that from experience.
Now, I imagine you, and I'm sorry, forgive me. I imagine you, I just don't want to lose this question. You were on the force during what they called the quote unquote militarization, that era where the federal government started to allocate or offer up funds that were earmarked for uh, sort of what the public started to define as militarization of police, whether the type of firearms you all used to carry, the type of armored vehicles, the type of sort of the SWATification, the SWAT teams, which detractors say over militarized or gave a militarized sort of mindset to domestic law enforcement. Uh, I imagine you saw that sort of transition, right?
Some of it, yes.
Do you think that that transition was an organic reaction to what you all were seeing in reality on the streets, or was that something that was really necessary in reality?
Well, even that question, it's political
Mm-hmm.
and racial.
Okay. How so?
Because how can I put this? Um, the vast majority of police officers are Caucasian. I don't think that's a secret.
Right.
A lot of crime, at least crime that you see on television or read about in the papers or see on, the cable networks, a lot of crime is in the Black community. And that's not a big secret.
Right.
And, I've worked with some officers who feel like, it's my opinion, that they feel like that they're there to police the minorities.
Right.
And as a result, bad things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also political. So it's a very complicated question you asked, and it's a very
Right.
complicated answer. But those
Yeah.
of us who live in this country day to day, African Americans, we see the issues. We see what's going on. So just thankfully we have organizations, people we can talk to or go to, so that we don't just get walked over.
Right. Okay. So in the sense of law enforcement, traditionally has been looked at, going back to that accusation that guy made against you, saying a tool of the white man. So the sense of even the words enforcement, law enforcement, when detractors or when people that okay, just say that guy that accused you of that, say he perceives laws as being essentially unfair, right? Say he perceives that of a law. The terminology in that perception is that you're coming to enforce something that they feel may be essentially unfair or racist or what have you. Now, how does law enforcement, or even using the term peace officer, what can be done to sort of fill that other niche, to come in to make inroads with the community and not be seen as sort of a strictly enforcement tool, because that's the impression that a lot of people have, is there anything in your opinion, should there be something that law enforcement should do to be more on the sort of maybe the preventive end, preventive side of social unrest and distress, be seen more as a peacemaking force?
Well, there are things like community policing, where you're community policing, you're with the public daily. They have things like substations where there are like mini police stations in the community. There are a lot of different programs, but the officer and the citizen have to work hand in hand. And it hasn't always been like that. When I was a kid, I was afraid of the police.
Really?
Not that I did anything wrong, but I knew the
Okay.
reputation.
Okay.
And my parents would tell you, watch out, don't get stopped by the police. Don't do,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you couldn't, the police in my community, I can't speak for all of them, but there were many corrupt ones.
Oh. Okay.
Things have changed a lot. But as I said earlier, when you're going through the application process to be a police officer, that needs to be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I think the age limit should rise.
Mm-hmm.
In Philadelphia, you could be a police officer at 19.
Oh, wow.
In my opinion, you don't have enough life experience to be carrying a weapon, making life and death decisions in the community at 19.
And having that sort of power.
And having that sort of power.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from the military, that's different. But, when you have a weapon on your hip, That's a lot of power.
Yeah, and then when you can encounter an individual and it's literally within your discretion in the moment, is this person gonna be home for Christmas, right? Or are they gonna spend the next, 5, 10 years, uh, behind bars, or am I gonna let them go? That is a lot of power. Uh,
It's a lot of power, but with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility.
right,
And again, as I said earlier, that profession is not for everyone. Are you
right,
in it
right.
for the right reason?
Yes,
Or are you just in it because you want to carry a gun and police black people, or you want to carry a gun and be a big man on campus?
right. Now that triggers a question, and wrapping up pretty soon, man. I appreciate your time. Uh, so with the current situation, I mean, like a sort of the momentum of the time, where in my opinion, I think one of the greatest powers, one of the greatest mainstays of law enforcement or any institution is the validity of the institution in the eyes of the general public. Because I think back in the days where it was the badge and it was a badge of honor, you even have catchphrases and cliches that you use synonymously. Badge of honor, you wear the badge on the inside, you only pin the medal on the outside. And the validity and moral ground that law enforcement needs to have in the eyes of the general public, when something happens and that sort of validity is shaken, questioned, um, like when you have a George Floyd situation and the entire world looks, and you sort of the moral fiber sort of law enforcement gets caught in a question, or peace officers. Um, Part of recruiting and retaining people of honor, people of dignity, people of standards and moral caliber, I imagine, also depends on the legitimacy of that corporation, of that institution. And I think maybe a catch 22 for that police are facing nowadays is that, as there's this sort of swelling opinion that's a negative opinion towards law enforcement, uh, it it definitely won't help. It, in fact, make it harder to attract the type of individuals you want to join, whereas the negative individuals that see that and say, "Oh, I actually want to be a part of that." Sort of as the narrative switches, you might wind up actually attracting a lot of what you don't want. And I've seen sort of advertisements around and heard it being spoken about that it's getting increasingly difficult for police departments and law enforcement agencies across the country to get people to want to sign up, except for the few that may be sort of the Napoleon complex people, the big guys on campus.
Well, let
What
me
did
ask you something, if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
yeah, it's okay.
Why would a young, educated African American male or female want to be a police officer or a fireman?
Right. um why would they want to be?
Yes.
Well, conceptually speaking, I think that when the institution itself is something that's attractive, first of all, I think it would have to be attractive. And by attractive, I mean appealing to those individuals who resonate with, I'm going to do the groundwork in my community. I'm going to help people. I'm a selfless type of person in the most ideal sense, that I'm going to be a part of a solution, a boots on the ground solution, not legislating, not writing bills. Many different jobs and careers in society help. But I think when you talk about interventive services like police, fire, medical, these have to be individuals that say, I am going to inject myself into these situations and be a direct hands on solution in moments of crises. And in order to get people to buy into such a selfless a career, because I imagine it can put dog years on you. You know, it's the ultimate fast lane. In
Mhm.
order to get people to buy into that, you need strong moral character. And I think that is the attractiveness of it for the selfless individual. But the flip side of that is, you know, as that appeal sort of wanes through, you know, media and the imagination of the public in general, I think you turn away or potentially turn away sort of that attitude and those candidates that you actually want to be part of a solution, change the department. You can wind up turning them away because now they don't want to be associated with, you know, the current image. And yeah, I think that's problematic. Talking of solutions, you know, what can be done? I mean, is it taking more control of media, getting more imagery out there? Is it only at staffing and employment levels like training, or is it more controlling the narrative, stricter discipline? I mean, what do you?
It's a combination of all those things, but you hit it with the, uh, the moral character. Because again, law enforcement, medical, fire department is not for everyone. It's not for everyone.
Right,
You have to be willing to do, certain things. You have to be willing to put your life on the line. You have to be willing to run into a burning house. You have to be
right,
willing to, if you hear gunfire, when everyone's running away from the gunfire, are you ready to run toward that gunfire and
right,
confront that person with a weapon?
right.
It's not for everyone. And I applaud the people who actually do the job and do it for the right reasons. Um,
Right.
there's so much more we can say about that.
I just want to add a something on to what you said, and this is you know, it's a compliment to you and anybody that does that. You know, I understand the social political arenas historically and concurrently the aggression, the enmity, the problematic things that are a solution or that we're trying to resolve nowadays, whether they be racial, social, economic. But I wanted to say that oftentimes the public envisions one's putting one's life on the line as acute instances of facing, you know, dogs or guns or fires or collapsing floors and roofs. But I would offer that in the sense that someone in that lane, when I say live dog years, I mean the stress that happens on a regular basis, both within the individual and then in the scenarios, though one can acclimate to it, still is a stress that is more impactful than a person who has a regular 9 to 5. And so the risking of life becomes sort of the shortening of life or the not being able to stop and sort of smell the roses during one's career in the same sense as someone who has not had to make a life-changing career choice. So yeah, I just want to say that, man, and kudos. I do have more questions. One last question, unless you know you have something else you wanted to mention. But were there times when you wanted to give up? What kept you going? And ultimately, if you could rewind time and go forward again, would you follow the same path?
Well, there was never a time I wanted to give up. I'll say the closest I came to that was my first 6 months on the department with the sergeant and lieutenant that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
That was about as close as I came. But no, I never thought about giving up. Um, I didn't join to give up. And I had a
Right.
long, successful career. I've helped a lot of people. Um, I've arrested a lot of people. I have given a lot of people breaks.
Mhm.
Um, my time is up, and I rode off into the sunset. I have a lot of memories, good and bad. Um, but those memories, you know, some uh, when you're in law enforcement, give you just a quick example. When you at the end of your shift, when you come home, you don't tell your family the bad things. You only tell them the good things that happened that day
Right.
because you don't want to put that burden of what you saw, how many bodies you saw, how many children you saw, how many, you know, people with a gun you confronted. You don't want to put that on your family, and you kind of
Right.
just hold it in, or you may talk to your buddies about it. Um, they have counseling service in the police department, and I'm sure they have in different departments. If you feel as though you need them,
Mhm.
personally, I didn't feel as though I needed it, but it's a job that's not for everyone, and I'm happy I did it. I'm blessed that I was able to retire, and fairly decent health. Um, I don't know much to say except that again, it's an honor. I still consider it an honorable profession, law enforcement, and I would recommend it to anyone who's considering it if you want
Ah,
to go in for the right reasons.
okay. And that sort of segues into, I guess that was the last thing I was going to say. If you had any advice for a young Black man or young Black woman who was considering going into law enforcement slash military, well, mainly law enforcement, um, I guess parting words of advice that you would give to them in terms of, I guess I just leave that open for you in terms of like maybe what you faced from within the department and on the streets. I mean, if you could, that might also be a loaded question as well, but
Well,
anything
I'll
succinct.
say this. In my rookie days, my younger days, I wish I had spoke up more. Over time
Okay.
I did, but I sort of regret I didn't speak up more when I was, younger in my rookie days at the
Okay.
police department.
Oh, that's man, appreciate that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're yeah, standing up for yourself. Because I imagine standing up for yourself, it translates directly into standing up for other people in the community. And
Well,
you know,
it won't make you popular with a lot of people, but they'll know where you stand.
right. Facts. Okay, man. Well, hey, I appreciate this. This has been great. Um, yeah, anything else you want to say, man? We'll wrap up. I appreciate your time.
Well, I thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming on. This is valuable here. Valuable information. And I'm sure, says a lot. Not just what, we talked about directly, but I'm sure um, out of what we've said too, people can get answers to other questions that maybe weren't even asked directly.
Oh, I would like to share one thing. When I decided to leave the police department, um, I knew 4 years ahead of time that I was going to leave the police department and retire. And during those 4 years, I said, well, I'm going to be leaving in 4 years, but all I have is a high school diploma. So my last 4 years of the police department, going to night school, I received my associate's and my bachelor's degree.
Oh, okay.
So when I left the police department and joined the workforce, I had some educational background, and that's important.
Okay. Congratulations on a long and fulfilling career. I mean, both fulfilling in terms of not just, uh, a career and a pension and stability, but I mean what you've been able to live firsthand. I honestly believe that the sunshine and the rain is part of the same environment.
Yes.
And I'm of the opinion that the hardships, even though they may not be pleasant to see and participate in and feel in the moment, I think that they are make a very rich experience in terms of how much growth you'll be able to do as an individual. We need the sunshine and the rain.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.